For every bad decision that did happen with Star Wars, even if they've since been rectified, there are lots more that came horribly close to occurring. I'm Ewan, this is Whatculture Star Wars, and here are 10 terrible Star Wars ideas that nearly happened. Number 10. The Adventures of the Starkiller. Before it eventually became the Star Wars we know and love, George Lucas's plans for a galaxy far, far away were initially very different. In his early drafts of The Star Wars, Lucas envisaged Luke Skywalker as an old general, and it was Anakin Starkiller who served the role of a young Padawan, albeit one with much more cockiness than the Luke we'd end up with. Han Solo, meanwhile, was an Urialian, a green-skinned alien with gills. Darth Vader didn't wear a helmet, Chewbacca's early design is what would eventually be used for the Lasats in Star Wars Rebels, and Leia was a 14-year-old princess with 2 brothers. Lightsabers, meanwhile, weren't a Jedi weapon, but used by stormtroopers instead, while the Force wasn't the mystical power it would later become, with the Jedi being more simply just great warriors. There are some recognizable beats among these rough and first drafts, but Lucas had struggles getting Star Wars made anyway, and without the idealistic young hero, the cocky but human rogue right-handed man, appropriately aged tough princess, and Vader looking like, well, Vader, it wouldn't have worked. Number 9. Han Solo on Kashyyyk. Although we did eventually end up with a Han Solo prequel movie in Solo: A Star Wars Story, we almost saw an even younger version of the scoundrel long before then. Due to the timeline, Han of this era would have only been a kid, around 10 years old, and the character made it reasonably far into the developmental process of Revenge of the Sith. Lucas had him written into the Kashyyyk scenes of the movie, as someone who'd helped uncover the location of Grievous. Concept art was drawn up with young Han envisaged as a total slob who was being raised by Chewbacca. And yeah, it would have been an extremely forced quote-unquote first appearance for the smuggler, changing what we think we know of him, as well as radically altering his and Chew's relationship. Number 8. Jin and Cassian Escape. 2016's Rogue One: A Star Wars Story was proof that Lucasfilm standalone movies could work, and one that only served to bolster the original film in the saga. One of the reasons it works so well isn't just because of Donnie Yen being cool and doing Donnie Yen things, it's because the stakes are massive. There's no Luke Skywalker guaranteed to survive. Instead, it's a ragtag bunch of rebels, none of whom we've even heard of. That sort of suggested they'd all die, but it's one thing for that to make sense, and quite another for Hollywood, and especially Disney, to kill off its heroes. And in fact, it almost didn't happen. In the initial treatments of the movie, the writers had assumed Disney would never go for such a downer ending, and thus found a way of having Jin and Cassian escape from Scarif. One of the film's writers, Gary Whitta, told Entertainment Weekly, a rebel ship came down and got them off the surface. The transfer of the plans happened later. Whatever the case, Jin and Cassian surviving would have been far too clean for the war movie we eventually got, a happy ending that it didn't need. It's great they eventually decided to go to Lucasfilm and seek the approval to kill the characters, making for a much more powerful climax and a stronger movie overall. Number 7. Directed by David Lynch? Due to the number of other roles he had taken on, along with a seeming dissatisfaction with the job, Lucas decided not to direct the second and third parts of his original Star Wars trilogy. Irvin Kershner was given the job for Empire, but return was offered to a few different names, and one of those was David Lynch, coming off the back of the Oscar-nominated The Elephant Man. When he turned it down after seeing things like Wookiees and Ewoks in the script, it was offered to David Cronenberg, who also said no. There's a lot to praise about both men, who are two great visionary talents, yet it's hard to imagine either as being a good fit for Star Wars. Neither really work in the same wheelhouse as the Star Wars saga, and both want a free reign they couldn't have with Lucas around. Lynch instead went on to make Dune, which bombed at the box office and with critics, and he blamed it on not having full artistic control. The exact same thing would have happened had he chosen the other big sci-fi movie being offered to him at the time. Number 6. Anakin's Force Ghost in Episode 7. The specter of Darth Vader looms large over The Force Awakens, serving as one of the main driving forces behind new villain Kylo Ren. However, while we do see Vader's broken mask in the movie, he could have appeared in a much more tangible way. The book, The Art of Star Wars: The Force Awakens, revealed concept art for a new Force Ghost take on Anakin Skywalker, once again played by Hayden Christensen. Unlike the ghosts we saw in the original trilogy, this would have been a more twisted version, flitting between Anakin and Vader, or the light and the dark. It seems likely that this would have been a part of Luke's story in the movie, which was a lot bigger in Michael Arndt's original script, and was cut when Luke's role was reduced to just the very end of the film. While a cool artistic interpretation of the character, I mean this art looks brilliant, it would have also contradicted the Force Ghost scene in the original, and then special editions, so probably for the best it didn't make the final cut. Number 5. Buffy the Blue Alien. Yoda is one of the most mysterious characters we meet in the original trilogy, and a part of that is down to his look. He's an odd, wizened figure, and extremely unlikely to be one of the most powerful Jedi to ever live, which is, of course, why the Yoda reveal works so well. Would it have worked as well, though, if he looked like a monkey, or even a Smurf? All were considered during the development of the character, and while the Yoda we end up with is strange looking enough, it's more fitting than the other concepts that were drawn up. The monkey idea, which would have seen a real animal in a mask, is absolutely horrendous. Yoda was also called Buffy in earlier versions, which itself wouldn't have been awful, but would have meant that a certain vampire slayer ended up quite differently. Number 4. Splinter of the Mind's Eye. When Star Wars hit theaters on May 25th, 1977, it became an unprecedented hit. So unprecedented, in fact, that George Lucas had a contingency plan in case the movie wasn't a success. He wanted a follow-up one way or another, so came up with a story called Splinter of the Mind's Eye, a smaller scale film that wouldn't have cost so much to make, meaning it would have likely been greenlit even if Star Wars failed. It was eventually written as a novel published in 1978. Since Harrison Ford wasn't signed on for a sequel at the time of writing, Han Solo was completely left out of the story. The focus was instead on Luke and Leia, who were stranded on a jungle planet and racing against Imperial stormtroopers to be the first to find the powerful Kyber crystal. There's a whole lot of sexual tension between Luke and Leia in the novel, who even engage in a spot of mud wrestling, and both also hold their own in a fight against Darth Vader, who then loses an arm. Number 3. No, I am your brother. Star Wars is all about family, with the Skywalker lineage at the heart of the saga, but there could have been another member of the clan, and one fans are pretty fond of at that. BROba Fett is one of Star Wars' coolest, most badass supporting players, aided by the sense of menace and mystery surrounding his appearances in The Empire Strikes Back. But George Lucas, being, well, George Lucas, at one point intended him to be Darth Vader's brother. The reveal was going to be made in the prequels, where we instead see a young Boba helping his similarly badass father Jango. The idea was eventually dismissed for being too hokey, and it would have been one familial link too far, not to mention very confusing. Number 2. George Lucas's sequel trilogies. It wasn't long after the release of Star Wars that George Lucas was talking about sequels, and not just for episodes 5 and 6. Even way back then, he claimed to have ideas for 3 trilogies, with other films to take it up to 12 movies in total. However, despite once distancing himself from the idea of making sequels, his story plans were given to Disney as part of the 2012 deal. It's unknown how exactly it would have looked, with various story hints given over the years, including a love interest for Luke, a focus on rebuilding the Republic, and seeing Luke become the greatest Jedi alive. Plus Maul and maybe Darth Talon too. There's a lot in there. Those obviously shifted as Empire and Return took shape, and the more recent word on Lucas's plans said they involved new characters and worlds, and also that it would have been centered on very young characters, most likely teenagers. Look, George Lucas is an absolute legend, and I hope he's having the best retirement ever, but it's probably a good thing he doesn't have to worry about Star Wars anymore. The sequels needed some distance from the filmmaker, even if The Force Awakens just basically closely mirrors A New Hope, and him directing, or even being involved at all, wouldn't have given the franchise the clean break it needed. And number 1, the original trench run. The trench run in the final act of Star Wars is one of the greatest moments in the entire saga, but it was almost very different. According to Michael Kaminsky's Secret History of Star Wars, the Death Star trench run was originally scripted entirely different, with Luke having 2 runs at the exhaust port. Marcia had reordered the shots almost from the ground up, trying to build tension lacking in the original scripted sequence, which is why this one was the most complicated. She warned George, if the audience doesn't cheer when Han Solo comes in at the last second in the Millennium Falcon to help Luke when he's being chased by Darth Vader, the picture doesn't work. It's hard to imagine the trench run playing out differently because the way the various characters and elements come together is what makes it such a wonder, but like a lot of Lucas's first cut, it left a lot to be desired. Star Wars is, among many other things, a testament to the power of editing, and that's perfectly highlighted by the great work of Marcia Lucas and co, and the finished trench run sequence. Are there any other Star Wars concepts you're glad were left on the cutting room floor? Let me know down in the comments below, and please don't forget to drop the video a like if you enjoyed it, and to subscribe to Whatculture Star Wars so you don't miss another upload going forward. I've been Ewan, and until next time, may the Force be with you.